Percussion of Mr. Barry Keane.
Yeah.
So tasty all the time with his percussion and his drumming. But that's why we say on drums and percussion is Barry Keane. Very blessed.
Also like the top studio drummer in the history of Canada. If you want to talk about who he's played with, he should talk about who he hasn't. It's a much shorter conversation.
And I think Barry has a little bit of a memory of probably one of the first sessions he did with Gord.
Thank you, Rick. And thanks to everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. Okay, back to 1972 is when I first met Gordon Lightfoot. I was just in the early stages of becoming a studio drummer, and Gord and Warner Brothers had decided it was time to do an album in Canada, and they needed some extra musicians to augment Gordon's touring group, which at the time was Red Shea, Terry Clements, and Rick Haynes. And folks, we're talking 1972, and Rick was already Gord's longtime bass player. So anyway, we got together in the studio in Toronto, and Warner Brothers brought Lenny Waronker from LA to produce. Lenny had produced James Taylor, Paul Simon, Randy Newman, Ricky Lee Jones, a pretty heavy-duty producer. And he brought the head engineer from Warner's, a fellow named Lee Hirschberg, to record the album, which turned out to be Old Dan's Records, one of my favorite albums. Anyway, we're in the control room toward the end of recording, and we're listening to a song, and Lenny said, it was You Are What I Am. And he said, great track, but it needs something. And Gord looked at me and said, I know what it needs. This song needs some leg. And I said, okay. And he said, you and me, and he pointed to the studio and said, we'll go out there. I said, okay. So we got the assistant engineer to set up a pair of stools. We sat side by side out in the studio, and we played what most people would call ham bone, where you play on various parts of your body, but mostly on your leg. So we got halfway through the first take. Lee Hirschberg, the engineer, piped in and said, the part is great, but we need a different sound. And Gord looked at me and he said, okay, man, drop your britches. Now, you have to understand, I just met Gordon Lightfoot. So, and I thought this has to be a joke. So we had our backs to the control room. I turned and looked. Nobody was laughing. So while I was trying to process this, Gord unbuckled, unbuttoned, unzipped, and down to his ankles go his pants. And he looked at me like, okay, it's your turn. So what do you do? So I did. I'm sitting on a stool next to Gordon Lightfoot, playing leg on our bare thighs, and that is what you hear on the song, You Are What I Am.
Thank you, Mr. Keane.
At least he didn't ask you to do something he wouldn't do himself.